Hello there. Welcome to Just the Discs. My name is Brian, and we talk about Blu-rays here. And today I am talking about a new Blu-ray from the good folks at Criterion. And it is a fascinating and excellent movie, a discovery for me. It is Buck and the Preacher from 1972. Now, this, obviously, as you can see, stars Sidney Poitier and Harry Belafonte, as well as Ruby Dee and Cameron Mitchell and others. And it is the directorial debut of Sidney Poitier, who would go on to do other films like Warm December following this, and then things like Uptown Saturday Night, Let's Do It Again, and Piece of the Action on through the 70s and into the 80s he was directing. But it's a pretty great debut film, I gotta say, and it is a Western that is based on the facts of the Black experience during the post-Civil War period. There's a sort of text scroll that comes across the screen at the beginning of the film that really sets the stage well, and so I'm just going to read that to you guys. It says, "The Civil War was over, and by law the slaves were freed, but when the promise of land and freedom was not honored, many ex-slaves journeyed out of the land of bondage in search of new frontiers where they could be free at last. They placed their hopes in the hands of a few black wagon masters that knew the territories of the West. None of this came easy, for not only did they have to overcome a hostile wilderness, but night riders and bounty hunters were hired by, quote, persons unknown to hunt them down and turn them back to the fields. This picture is dedicated to those men, women, and children who lie in graves as unmarked as their place in history." So a very telling and powerful statement at the beginning of the film. And it's a really great movie on many levels in that it is a great story with great characters. It is entertaining, but it also has a message to it that is, quite impactful. And it's an important film from that time. It's one of the earliest examples of this kind of story told from this point of view. It's just very much about these characters and their plight. We're dealing with basically a couple different wagon trains of, ex-slaves that are trying to find their way west, and how they are really struggling because, they need the help of this ex-cavalry sergeant named Buck, played by Poitier, to guide them. But in addition to that, they do have these night riders, which are led by a very evil Cameron Mitchell, who are trying to kill them, scare them to going back to, in this case, some of them are from Louisiana. And the plantation owners back there really want their workforce back. So these guys have been hired to do whatever they have to get them back. So it's pretty heavy stuff, and it's great that Poitier's character is such a strong character, and he happens upon, while he's fleeing from the Night Riders, he happens upon this hustler preacher played by Harry Belafonte, and it's a great performance by Belafonte. He plays the Reverend Willis Oakes Rutherford of the High and Low Order of the Holiness Persuasion Church. And it's, he's not really a preacher, but he plays at that and certainly uses that as a good defense against hostility, if you will. But yeah, it's tough when you get on the radar of this Night Rider group, especially the Cameron Mitchell character, who's just a murderous, evil dude, and it's played pretty darn well by him and his gang. And so then it becomes sort of a buddy movie. They're sort of fighting against the Night Riders and trying to protect the wagon train. There's this sort of uneasy alliance with some Native Americans that are willing to help the wagon train and Poitier somewhat, but they're also not willing to fight for them, which is totally understandable in the context. And it's really interesting, the conflict therein between the Native Americans and Poitier and his group, and yet there's, like I said, an uneasy alliance there. So that's fascinating to watch. But overall, both Poitier and Belafonte are a great duo. The film has a cool Western buddy vibe to it, whilst being, filled with tension. There's a great deal of tension. And they sort of become these folk hero outlaws, and there's even some like Butch and Sundance energy at times, I think. And so this movie for me was like a really great discovery, a movie that I hadn't heard of before. I mean, I'd heard of it, but I hadn't seen before, and was really glad to see in this wonderful new presentation from Criterion. It's just a really solid film. Like I said, a big discovery for me this year, and I'm glad I finally got to check it out. Now, this is a wonderful Criterion Blu-ray. The transfer looks very good. It is a Columbia Pictures film, and they tend to take pretty good care of their masters, their classic film masters. And so this is a good-looking transfer. New 4K digital restoration with uncompressed binaural sound track. And then in terms of the extras, I'll go through what's included here. There's something called Expanding the Western, which is about 24 and a half minutes, and it features film scholar Mia Mask discussing the making of Buck and the Preacher, like what led to it, and Sidney Poitier as director, and how his film career as a filmmaker was often overlooked. And there's also just this great cinematic, rich history of black westerns that she works into the discussion throughout. But she talks about Poitier and Belafonte meeting in the American Negro Theater in the 1940s, where they both were taking classes, and how they became close friends, and gives some history to their relationship and how they had a falling out eventually, and that by 1967, Poitier is the #1 star in America. He makes 3 big signature films. He makes To Sir with Love, In the Heat of the Night, and Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, which was a huge deal at the time, but also brought some criticism to him about the kinds of films he was making and what they were saying to wide audiences about black people, and that he could be doing something a bit more helpful in terms of representation, and he was really hurt by it and took it to heart. But anyway, so there's this falling out that Belafonte and Poitier have, and I'll let you watch the thing to hear about that. But what's neat about the falling out is that it is mended in some ways by Belafonte, after a few years of not speaking, getting this script for Buck and the Preacher and really responding to it and calling Poitier to say, we got to make this, and how they sort of put aside their differences and their ongoing argument and really got excited about the idea of how to get this made. And I think Poitier had a multi-picture deal at Columbia at the time, and so he was able to get it made and bring over a production team from another film that they had really liked making, and it really worked out, So it's a neat story, and there's like I said, there's a lot more to this featurette than that, but that's sort of one element of it. In addition to that, we have an interview, new one from Harry Belafonte's daughter, Gina. It's about 14 minutes long. She talks about her dad getting into acting and singing. I didn't realize that the acting came before the singing. For some reason, I had thought the singing led to the acting. But it was actually a thing where he had been acting in a play, and they, were telling him he wanted to sing, or I can't remember if he was like, I can't sing, and they were like, oh, we just saw you in a play singing, and it became a thing where he started singing, and how he decided to start doing these new arrangements of the folk music of the Caribbean, where he was from, in Jamaica, and how he became a big star that way. And she talks a lot about his relationship to the civil rights movement, which was a big deal to him, which he was a big part of, and sort of goes on through his career and stuff like that. It's a really nice discussion of the man and his work from his daughter. And then lastly, we have TV appearances by both Belafonte and Poitier. There is a 12-minute, 50-second thing as part of something called the Great American Dream Machine. That's sort of a behind-the-scenes look at Buck and the Preacher. So we have that section. Then we have 2 talk shows. We have a show called Soul from 1972. This is about a 28-minute episode, and it is Sidney Poitier and Harry Belafonte in a very intimate talk show. It's basically the 2 of them sitting at a round red table with like an audience nearby, and it goes into the one thing that's mentioned in both this interview and the following Dick Cavett Show interview is the idea that Harry Belafonte is a very handsome man, and in this film he was sort of uglied up for the role of this preacher. And he grew out his hair, he puts on a beard, he blackened his teeth a little bit, and he's asked in both interviews why he wanted to do that, and he kind of says the same thing in both interviews, which is like, as an actor, I've always found it difficult to be taken seriously, and basically when he's tried to do drama, that people sort of see him as, I guess, more of a lighthearted guy based on his singing and things like that and his looks, and so he couldn't get across the emotion that he was trying to get across in his acting, and so he thought if he changed up the look a bit, it might work, and I think in his mind it did, and I think it does in this film. He definitely gets across a range of emotion, and he is a wonderful character, a rascal, but a guy who's got a lot more going on than just that. So that's touched on, and then the host is asking Belafonte about why making this film was so important, and he goes into the reasons why at this time he feels like it's the reason to make it is because of the time, and it's an important topic to him. And in both this and the Dick Cavett Show interview, which is just Harry Belafonte, he touches on this idea of the Civil War and the ex-slaves, and how there was like a couple options that were seen, that they could go back to Africa, which is really expensive, or they could proceed west. And he lays out sort of the background, which is the kind of thing that's a little bit laid out in that opening text crawl, but he goes into a much greater detail about the situation at that time. And so it's a really nice discussion of the important themes of the period and the filmmaking, and it's a good, nice little interview. The Dick Cavett Show, a little more relaxed. Dick Cavett and just Harry Belafonte. It's about an hour and 4 minutes. They lead off by talking about the uglifying thing, and they just have a conversation. And Dick Cavett's conversations tend to meander, and he may be your style, he may not be. But I find that there's always some interesting bits that come out of the Dick Cavett interviews, and I love that they are included in these Blu-rays. But they're also pretty widely available on YouTube. If you want to look up Dick Cavett and just about any actor, filmmaker, celebrity of the 60s and 70s, he's talking to them. You can go watch him talk to Groucho Marx multiple times. Just tons of folks came to his show for the relaxed atmosphere and conversation, and he was just kind of a hip dude at the time. I don't know how hip he comes across in this interview necessarily, but it ultimately, like I said, they're able to dig out some interesting stuff within the course of that hour-long chat. So it's a lot of great stuff that's included here on this disc. And like I said, I was really happy to just discover this movie for the first time, and to be able to do so in a wonderful edition like this is always, for me, the best. It's the reason why, none of us has seen everything, and sometimes that works out because you get a chance to see the thing you haven't seen in the best possible presentation, and it really allows you to enjoy it, I think, the most that you can. So anyway, great release from Criterion, Buck and the Preacher from 1972. Highly recommended. Also includes an essay in here in the little booklet, which is done up as a reward poster, which is pretty cool. And the essay is by Aisha Harris. So I look forward to digging into that. And it gives a little cast listing and everything in there. It's actually really nice handbill kind of design. I really dig that, actually. Criterion always does a nice job with the design of their stuff, and this is no exception. So Anyway, thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. And I will talk to you soon. Bye-bye.